adverse concern.
Yeah.
But then when I was working at Concordia University in Montreal, I did some live exhibits there that I didn't show you in my presentation. And I had to negotiate very simple things with the Department of Biological Sciences there that they'd never had an artist ask them for anything before, or the biosafety people. And that took, almost a year of negotiation. It was very aggressive and concerned. They were concerned about, their main concern was their public perception, either of fear around our project, that we were dangerous and that we might make them think that biological sciences is also dangerous. Their other concern was that they thought that we might be too critical of the corporate relationship to the biological sciences department at that university, and they were very concerned about that. But then I just did a very similar talk to this one in the biological sciences department in my own university last week. And they were like, cheering and took me out for lunch. So I think it really depends on what group you get and what, and how. Also, maybe how I do my presentation that day. Some days I'm more disarming than others. But overall, scientists are a lot like artists. They are very lonely. They work really hard on very small, specialized things in their lab. And when someone from the outside world seems to know and shows interest in their work, they're usually very happy to talk to you.
And your course, the students on it, that's a choice, right? They don't have to.
No, they don't have to.
Right, yeah.
And we have primarily art students, but this year we also had a couple of humanities students, and we had 2 hard science students. And it was excellent. Are there any other questions?
Okay, so what interested me about all the stuff you were saying was sort of you're going back and forth between actual, doing things with organisms and metaphorical representations of it. So, okay, I don't have a big question, but can you comment more on that?
Absolutely. Unlike most bioartists in my field, I come from a traditional fine arts background. So I am very concerned about systems of representation. So in all of my work, not only is the life form being manipulated, but I am very careful about the color of the incubator, the size, the scale, the shape, what history that evokes. And the reason for that is multifold. I know that bioart dies. Most of my projects live for a couple of weeks. And I know that how they're going to be discussed and interpreted and understood is through their documentation. So I am very careful about the types of documents that I create, because I feel that will really deeply affect people's relationship and understanding to the projects that I do. Some of my colleagues really come from more of a design or amateur science background, and their projects will be like banal, and there's cords sticking out the side, and it's kind of off on the side of a table. But the artwork itself is really, the bio component is really transformative. And so from their perspective, a lot of the representational strategies that I engage in are maybe frivolous or counterintuitive to the goal of bioart, which is supposed to be making art with like living media. But I see a very important strategy where I manipulate my work on both levels to achieve the greatest effects. Because I think that I want people to experience biotech hands-on, and I do a lot of labs and workshops so that people can come in and try for themselves. But I know that would be proportionately impossible in order to really affect the public ear engagement in biotechnology, and that representation is also imperative.
Okay. And I have another question,
Sure.
which is that this is a hypothetical, perspective question. Do you have any ideas about how the collaboration in what you're doing with other organisms? And I'm just thinking of lots of recent sort of theoretical philosophical things which argue move toward us the agency of bacteria, viruses, and others, things like that. So is that ever something you address?
It's not something I've addressed in my own research. I think it's where my work has to go. Because if I'm arguing for these interspecies interrelations, they're mutually beneficial and mutually detrimental, then I need to understand what kind, if, agency that these organisms that I'm working with have. There have been small steps into that. Like, for example, I showed you the images of me in the lab. I didn't bring all of them with me, where I'm collecting bacteria from my toes and growing them. But what I'm doing also in that space, here, it's this one, and there's multiple images from the suite, is laid out in front of me are dishes of already growing bacteria. And I sort of conceived of this piece as a performance for them rather than a performance for an audience. You know, it was just me, a photographer, and billions and billions of bacteria in that space. So I see that as a direction that things need to go, but it's not something that I have fully explored as yet. Is there any other questions?
Other
Yeah.
questions, comments?
You invoked, you know, the mad scientist the lining seems to me is thin between mad scientist and mad artist.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you see people engaging in the sense is, okay, there's the man who interestingly does the plant manipulation to go counter the eugenics of plant production. How far can that go, let's say, I mean, I don't know why we think of plants as basically non-sentient or non-participants in kind of manipulation. But do we ask ourselves, you know, when we're with suspension organisms, if people do that, you know, they will from cells and bacteria and so on. I know there's this whole philosophical issue of their agency, but, you know, I'm looking at more conventional conceptions of agency, where you'd say, well, what do they want? And are they, how are we using them in these kinds of experiments, whether for science or for art? And I'm not in the least arguing that science is more serious,
No, but
or, you know, more valuable because they're problematic.
But we have a system of understanding why and then the exchange value of using life in that arena. Look, this is a difficult question, and I think that for myself, I've crossed the line before, or at least experienced myself changing my mind about where my lines lie. The work that I did at Symbiotica with the living cells was very, very difficult for me. And the reason for that is that I was a vegetarian, and I was using mouse cells as well as the fetal bovine serum to keep those cells alive in fairly large quantities. And I really felt that I was being a hypocrite if I wouldn't eat the meat and I wasn't wearing leather, but I was manipulating it towards aesthetic ends in my work. And there are a few things that happened out of that. One, I realized that I need to look my meat in the eye, and I actually took on eating meat during that time. But in a very voracious way, I went down to like an Australian barbecue, and I got a really big lamb shank with like tendons and stuff, and I ate it, you know. And I did that like once a week for the whole second half of my residency, so that I could feel the guilt. Because when I'm looking through my cells in a microscope, they look like a video, right? It looks like a mediated relationship, and I wasn't feeling guilty. So I had guilt for not feeling guilty enough. So I started eating meat, and to induce more guilt. So it was very traumatic on that level. The other sort of conclusion I came to during that time is that if I was using such a small amount in comparison to such a juggernaut industry to bring that information to a more general audience and understanding, I felt that it was a significant but important sacrifice. And I chose to be grateful for that sacrifice. And I will also say that in addition to that, any artists who use these types of technologies really need to engage in the institutional human and animal research ethics. And that happens for a variety of reasons. First of all, if you have any government funding, and a lot of bioart is expensive, then you need those types of approvals. So my work has been deemed ethical at every level, even if I wasn't entirely sure of its ethicalness, because I've learned that there's also a bureaucratic definition of what is ethical. A lot of bioartists engage in that. I will say that some of the art that I showed you, like the earlier work of the pigs that were tattooed, like I would never work with mammals. In fact, I try to keep into invertebrates myself, okay? Like things that I know might be sensing in some way, but not in a way that is measurable or understandable to us. The pigs, that work is done in China, but it gets exhibited in North America, and there's a real internationalism and a use of the international discrepancy in terms of animal research ethics for that type of work. And that's something that really concerns me. And that's something that as, you know, I wouldn't argue in terms of freedom of speech that it's not a good, that it shouldn't be done, but I can, as someone who also curates and adjudicates